At midnight tonight, this country hits the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. In fact, here's what I heard when I called the White House before the show.
We apologize, but due to the lapse in federal funding, we are unable to take your call. Once funding has been restored, our operations will resume.
So don't call the President of the United States. Well, with hundreds of thousands of federal employees captured in this stalemate, President Trump argued once again that it's up to the Congress to find a solution, holding over it his threat to declare a national emergency to pay for his wall.
The easy solution is for me to call a national emergency. I could do that very quickly. I have the absolute right to do it, but I'm not going to do it so fast. What we're not looking to do right now is national emergency. What we want to do, we have the absolute right to do it. In many ways, it's the easy way out. But this is up to Congress, and it should be up to Congress, and they should do it.
Absolute right. Well, meanwhile, more than 800,000 federal employees missed a paycheck for the first time today.
It really hurts. We can't pay our bills, can't pay the doctors, mortgages.
It's like we're being held hostage.
If you can't pay the bills, then you're going to have financial charges, and the creditors, they may not accept it. So it's going to cause a pressure, especially when it's me and my wife sometimes trying to work with her situation.
What's her situation?
She has cancer. It's in the hands of one person, which is our president, and hope that, he can understand or sympathize with the poor.
Well, this means that workers who were making it paycheck to paycheck are not now making it. The president said he'd sign a bill passed by the House today ensuring federal employees receive payback when the government reopens, and offered this message.
The message is that I appreciate their service to the country. They are incredible people, the federal employees that we're talking about. I just really appreciate the fact that they have handled it so incredibly well. And many of them agree with what we're doing. We have no choice.
While President Trump continues to dangle the prospect of declaring a national emergency as a means of bypassing Congress. But the Wall Street Journal reports that in a recent Oval Office meeting, White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, quote, argued an emergency should be invoked only if it creates a clear path for the White House to build the wall. Adding that, according to sources close to the meeting, Kushner said, let's stop doing things just to do them. Well, that sounds wise. But one of the president's top allies in Congress, Senator Lindsey Graham, is out there pushing the president onward. After meeting with the president at the White House today, he argued in a series of tweets that Democrats don't want to make a deal, and later wrote, Mr. President, declare a national emergency now, build a wall now. That's Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. The White House has gone ahead and directed the Army Corps of Engineers to look at its budget, in search of the money for the wall. So they're pushing ahead. NBC News reports one proposal could include tapping into billions of dollars of disaster relief. Trump could dip into the $2.4 billion allocated for projects in California, including flood prevention, as well as the $2.5 billion set aside for reconstruction projects in Puerto Rico, which is still recovering, as everybody knows, from Hurricane Maria. I'm joined right now by Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, Christine Todd Whitman, former New Jersey governor and EPA administrator under President Bush, Barbara Boxer, former California Democratic senator, and Sam Stein, politics editor for the Daily Beast. Thank you all. I want to start with Senator Blumenthal. What's he holding? Something's holding this guy up, the president. He's been playing this for days now. I'm going to do it. I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to do this. We're going to go. We're going to fight with the courts. I'm going to do this by emergency action. What's stopping him?
First and foremost, he's encountering resistance within his own party. Most recently today, Senator Grassley, a very powerful and well-respected member of the Senate leadership, has said that he would oppose use of this kind of military or disaster-related funding. We've been hearing for years, Chris, about the real emergency in military readiness that this country faces, and we've increased funding for our military on a bipartisan basis to meet that real emergency. Now the president is talking about taking military funding as well as disaster-related funding and exacerbating a real emergency to deal with this manufactured emergency, a product of his own actions at the border. And there is a crisis there. It's a humanitarian crisis, not a security crisis. The levels of apprehension are 1/5 of what they were in the year 2000. Crime is at its lowest rate in McAllen, Texas, where the president visited yesterday. But we face a need to continue military construction to make our bases safer. We face a need to deal with the forest fires and emergency relief for Puerto Rico and Texas and Florida for their national disasters. The president is talking about defying the law, breaking constitutional norms and principles, and the American people are seeing through it. And I think he is feeling the pressure within his own party from advisors in his own White House who see the facts and the law as against him.
Oh, speaking of the Mexico border, has your colleague Lindsey Graham been chewing on the loco weed or what? What's going on with this guy? He plays golf with them, and now all of a sudden he's starting to go out. He was with him on Kavanaugh in a crazy way. Why is this guy so totally, whatever he's doing with Trump, I don't want to get into the weirdness of it, but why is he so loyal to Trump now? He used to be an independent operator. Lindsey Graham, what happened?
He has been, for many years that I've known him, a thoughtful and insightful and rational legislator and a friend. And I'm mystified by much of what he has to say today. But I think that Lindsey Graham, the lawyer, will see that the constitutional norms and the statutes here would plainly be violated. And a court should see through the political pandering and posturing and even the delay, which defeats the idea that we have an emergency. If there's an emergency, it would be immediate, sudden, dangerous, serious. There's no factual justification for it. And I think Lindsey Graham will eventually come to see that there's no factual and legal basis here for this kind of action, and a court would and should see through it.
Well, speaking of the erstwhile reasonableness of the Republican Party, let me go to former Governor Christie Todd Whitman of New Jersey. You were head of EPA. You know what it means to run a federal agency. What's the cost of this to the country? The fact that these people are some showing up for work, some not getting paid for showing up for work. And by the way, there's 7 Republicans in the House today who voted to not pay them, even if they have been showing up for work. In other words, don't even pay the pay you owe them. Your thoughts, Governor?
No, it's unconscionable to me. And there's still a question of those who are furloughed, whether they will get everything back. The ones who have been working part-time or being paid part-time, working full-time, they're guaranteed to get their money back. But the ones who are furloughed, not. It's going to take congressional action and the president to sign a bill. And he certainly doesn't seem to care much about them right now. So it's a really dangerous situation. If we had an emergency, as Senator Blumenthal was saying, if this is a crisis, I agree, it's a humanitarian crisis. But if it's a crisis of, all these rapists, murderers, terrible people coming across the border, building a wall is going to take decades. It's not going to happen overnight. So what are we doing in between? It's time to get into the 21st century with border security. We all want it. Nobody said they don't want it. And let's not forget, there was a bill passed by both houses, bipartisan bill, that would have addressed this issue based on what the president had told them he would accept. And then all of a sudden he changed his mind and said, no, he wasn't going to accept it.
Well,
so it's really, I
understand
why it's so hard.
I
understand why it's so hard to do a deal.
Yeah,
it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me because it's very hard to do a deal with this man.
Well, as President Trump has weighed declaring a national emergency, some of his Republican allies on Capitol Hill have warned of the consequences.
I don't think he should do that. I think it's a bad precedent, and it contravenes the power of the purse that comes from the elected representatives of the people.
Today, the national emergency is border security, and it entitles him to go out and do something. We all support that. Tomorrow, the national security emergency might be, climate change. So let's seize fossil fuel plants or something. I mean, maybe it's an exaggeration, but my point is we got to be very careful about endorsing broad uses of executive power.
And here's a really hideous comment. One of the president's chief defenders in the House of Representatives, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, told the Wall Street Journal, now you will not believe what this guy said, quote, I don't want the next national emergency to be some Democrat president says we have to build transgender bathrooms in every elementary school in America. Talk about a reach. To stick at the transgender people. What a reach. Senator Boxer, thank you. It's great to have you back. I mean, government hasn't been so smooth since you left, by the way. So
I noticed that.
What do you make of this? Crazy. I said the other night it's like the McLaughlin Group, only it's the government. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, this crazy guy talking about transgender has nothing to do with the border. He's sticking it to those folks. And now this president keeps threatening, I'm going to drop the bomb. I'm going to, go to emergency declaration, a national emergency. And then he seems to he getting nervous. Something's going on.
Well, if I could say, there's so much hate in people's hearts. And when you hear someone say that, like that congressman, just hurting people gratuitously. And it all comes from the top. It comes from Donald Trump, who has anger and hate all over himself. And here's the thing. Chris, you and I go way back to when you worked for Tip O'Neill. I hasten to say that was in the 80s. Yep. And this is one budget item, okay? A wall out of tens of thousands of budget items. And the way to fix it, first of all, spend the money you already have to build a barrier. I am sure Speaker Pelosi will tell you in the House, when you put forward your new budget, which is coming due soon, let us know why you think the wall is the best thing to do. The fact of the matter is, I voted for the Secure Fence Act way back in 2006. That was a time when it made sense to build the barriers. But now we have new technologies, better ways to secure the border. There's no argument over the need to do it. Do it in regular order. I'm sure she would say she would have hearings. You can bring your experts. They'll bring their experts. And we'll get this thing done. Right now, there's one emergency. And that is you have 800,000 hard-working Americans suffering, thousands of contractors. This thing is a nightmare because he couldn't, the president, fulfill his pledge to have Mexico build a wall, period.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.